In the shadowed cradle of the eternal winter, where the moon wept silver tears upon frozen spires, a single chain whispered promises of forgotten light. Alara's world had narrowed to the bite of iron against her wrists, the relentless drip of meltwater from the castle's vaulted ceiling echoing like the slow unraveling of her soul. She was no stranger to rejection. It had shadowed her steps since the day her Pax Alpha had cast her out, branding her an Omega unfit for the wild heart of the North. "Weak blood," he had snarled, his eyes cold as the blizzards that now clawed at the castle walls. Banished to the fringes, she had wandered the snow-choked forests until the Vampire King's raiders found her. Easy prey, they thought, for their lord's endless hunger. Now, chained in the depths of his icy fortress, she was a trophy, a vessel for whatever dark rituals the night demanded. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp stone and old blood, the kind that never fully washed away. The castle of King Draven loomed like a beast carved from the mountains themselves, its towers piercing the perpetual twilight where the sun dared not linger. Wind howled through arrow slits, carrying distant ueves from the wolves that prowled the borders, reminders of the life she had lost. Alara's breath fogged before her, her body curled against the chill that seeped into her bones. She was 21 winters old, her dark hair matted with frost, her skin pale as the marble floors above. But it was the silver locket at her throat that anchored her now, the one symbol she had clung to through exile and capture. A gift from her mother, etched with the crescent moon of the goddess, it held a single drop of dried blood, her own, drawn in a rite of passage she had never completed. It warmed faintly against her chest, as if mocking the numbness that had settled over her heart. What strength was there in mercy, she wondered, when the world offered only fangs and chains? Footsteps echoed from the corridor beyond her cell, heavy and deliberate, not the skittering gait of the vampire thralls. Alara tensed, her pulse quickening like a trapped bird's wings. The door groaned open, spilling torchlight into the gloom. And there he stood, a figure cloaked in shadow, his broad shoulders straining against a mantle of ragged wolf fur. He was no vampire. The scent of pine and earth clung to him, wild and alive, cutting through the decay like a blade. His eyes, storm-gray and haunted, swept the chamber, locking onto her with an intensity that made the air thicken. Kyle, king of the Silverfang pack, had come for blood. Guilt had been his shadow for years, ever since the betrayal that cost him his mate's life and fractured his realm. The vampires had encroached, their undead legions spilling over the borders, and whispers spoke of Draven's plan to unleash an ancient curse under the blood moon. Kyle had slipped past the guards under cover of night, his body a weapon honed by endless wars, muscles corded like twisted roots, scars mapping the weight of his crown. He was here to end it, to drive a silver dagger into the Vampire King's heart and reclaim the fragile peace. But as he stepped forward, the locket at Alara's throat caught the light, its lunar glow pulling at something deep within him, a primal tug he could not name. She shrank back against the wall, chains rattling like brittle bones. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the cold, but beneath it stirred a curiosity she could not quell. Who was this intruder, with his alpha's bearing and the sorrow etched into his jaw? His presence filled the cell, warm and vital, chasing away the frost that had claimed her limbs. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice raw from disuse, carrying the faint tremor of one who had learned to expect cruelty. Kyle froze, his hand midway to the dagger at his belt. The question hung between them, simple yet laden with the weight of fates unseen. He had expected guards, traps, perhaps the king himself, not this fragile form, chained like a sacrifice. Her eyes, deep as forest pools, held no deception, only the quiet defiance of the broken. The locket pulsed faintly, and for a moment the wind outside seemed to still, as if the moon itself held its breath. He should have turned away, pressed on to his purpose, but the instinct that had guided him through battles now rooted him in place. This Omega, rejected and forgotten, stirred the guilt he carried like a crown of thorns. What redemption could there be in killing a monster when mercy called from the shadows? Ilara watched him, the silence stretching taut as a bowstring. The castle groaned under another gust, snow whispering against the stones like secrets unspoken. She had been left to die here, her pack's shame made manifest, but in this stranger's gaze, she glimpsed something unbroken, a flicker of the wild that her blood still remembered. The locket grew warmer, its blood-drop core a silent witness to the choice unfolding. Strength, she thought, was not in the chain that bound her, but in the mercy she might yet extend to one who sought only vengeance. Cale knelt slowly, his fingers brushing the lock on her chains, the metal cold against his skin. The encounter was born of fear and curiosity, a spark in the endless night, denying the pull even as it ignited. Outside, the moon climbed higher, casting its pale judgment over the frozen world, where fire and blood waited to claim their due. Cale's fingers worked the lock with a precision born of shadowed hunts, the tumblers yielding like reluctant confessions under his touch. The chain fell away with a hollow clink echoing through the cell like the first crack in glacial ice. Ilara rubbed her wrists, the skin raw and etched with the bite of iron, but it was the sudden freedom that stole her breath, the weight lifting not just from her limbs, but from the corners of her spirit where despair had rooted deep. She drew back instinctively, her body coiling against the damp wall, eyes wide on this intruder who smelled of storm-swept pines and the musk of untamed earth. Fear slithered through her veins, cold as the meltwater pooling at her feet, yet curiosity flickered beneath it, a warmth she hadn't felt since the pack's fires had turned their backs on her. He rose slowly, his silhouette towering in the torchlight, the ragged wolf fur mantle shifting like a living shadow across his broad frame. Scars traced his forearms, pale lines against the bronze of his skin, maps of battles where mercy had been a luxury he could ill afford. Cale's gray eyes held hers, stormy depths swirling with unspoken burdens, the guilt of a king who had failed his own, the mate lost to vampire fangs in a raid he should have foreseen. He had come for Draven's death, silver dagger heavy at his belt, but this Omega's presence unraveled his purpose like thread from a frayed cloak. The locket at her throat gleamed, its crescent moon catching the flame's dance, and a primal hum stirred in his chest, instinctive and unwelcome. Fated? No, he pushed the thought away. Fate was a chain he had long since shattered. "Who are you?" Ilara repeated, her voice threading the silence like a fragile vine. It carried the tremor of one who had whispered to shadows too long, yet there was steel in it, forged in the exile that had stripped her bare. She rose unsteadily, legs numb from disuse, the chill of the stone floor seeping through her tattered shift. The air between them thickened, charged with the scent of his vitality clashing against the cell's rot. Blood and frost, life against undeath. Outside, the wind howled a dirge, whipping snow against the castle's flanks, while distant eaves pierced the night, wolves calling to a moon that watched impassively. Cale's jaw tightened, the weight of his crown a phantom ache even here, in this den of monsters. "A hunter," he said at last, his voice low and gravel-rough, like stones grinding under boot. "Come to end the night that preys on the living." He glanced toward the corridor, ears straining for the skitter of thrall feet or the hiss of vampire guards. Time bled away. Draven's heart awaited his blade. Yet this woman, chained, rejected, her eyes holding the quiet fire of forgotten moons, anchored him. The connection tugged at him, raw and unbidden, a pull deeper than alliance or pity. He denied it, rationalizing it as the haze of battle lust. But his gaze lingered on the locket, its blood-drop core seeming to pulse in rhythm with his own heart. Ilara stepped closer, despite the fear knotting her gut, drawn by the heat radiating from him like a hearth in the endless winter. Her pack had deemed her weak, an omega whose blood ran too thin for the wild's demands, but in this alpha's presence, something stirred. An echo of the goddess's whisper, lunar and insistent. She reached for the locket, fingers brushing its warm surface, and for a fleeting moment, she saw it. A vision of silver fangs gleaming under blood moon, a betrayal that mirrored her own casting out. "You're no thrall," she murmured, curiosity overriding caution. "But you're wounded all the same. I can smell it, the guilt, like smoke from a dying fire." He flinched, the words striking truer than any dagger. Kale had led his Silver Fang pack through blizzards and betrayals, his queen's death a scar that festered beneath his ethical resolve. Duty demanded he press on, sever the vampire curse at its root, but mercy, that elusive strength, whispered of another path. Her nearness ignited the air, their breaths mingling in white plumes, the cell shrinking around them until only the locket's glow remained. A beacon in the gloom. Instinct urged him to claim, to protect, but he stepped back, denying the bond with a king's iron will. "Stay here," he growled, turning toward the door. "The shadows will claim you if you follow." But Alara followed, her bare feet silent on the stone, the locket swaying like a pendulum of fate. Fear warred with the spark of connection, curiosity blooming into a defiant bloom amid the pain. The corridor stretched before them, torch flames guttering in the draught, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters. Wind keened through cracks, carrying the metallic tang of blood from chambers above. Draven's feasts, endless and insatiable. Kyle moved like a predator, every step measured, his hand hovering near the dagger. But Alara's presence at his side was a distraction he could not shake. She was no warrior, her frame slight against the castle's monolithic weight, yet her eyes held a quiet power, the rejected Omega who had survived where stronger wolves had fallen. A low hiss echoed from the shadows ahead, thralls, their eyes glowing with unholy hunger, shambling from alcoves where they nested like vermin. Kale whirled, positioning himself between her and the threat, his body a shield of corded muscle and unyielding resolve. The first lunged, claws extended, but his fist met its jaw with a crack, sending it crumpling into the frost-kissed wall. Alara's heart thundered, the locket burning against her skin now, as if the blood within awakened to the fray. She grabbed a loose chain from the floor, swinging it with desperate fury, the metal whipping through air to tangle a second thrall's limbs. Pain lanced her palms, but the act ignited something fierce. A curiosity transmuting to alliance, fear yielding to the instinct of survival shared. Kyle glanced at her, surprise flickering in his storm-gray eyes, the denial cracking like thin ice. Together they fought, back to back in the narrow passage, the clash of flesh and iron ringing out amid the wind's wail. Blood sprayed, dark and viscous, staining the snowdrifts that piled at the corridor's end. The locket swung wildly, its lunar etchings catching moonlight, filtering through a high slit, illuminating the raw truth. This was no mere encounter, but the forge of a bond, instinctive and resisted, born in the crucible of fear and the curiosity that dared to bridge their wounds. As the last thrall fell, silence descended, broken only by their ragged breaths and the distant rumble of the castle stirring awake. Kyle wiped blood from his knuckles, meeting her gaze with a mix of wariness and reluctant awe. What was strength, if not choosing to see the light in another's shadow? The moon outside climbed, its silver judgment falling upon them, where the paths of vengeance and redemption intertwined like veins of ore in the mountain's heart. Ilara touched the locket, its warmth a promise unspoken, the connection no longer deniable, yet the denial lingered, a fragile barrier against the storm to come. The corridor's silence settled like fresh fallen snow, heavy and deceptive, broken only by the drip of dark blood pooling from the fallen thralls. Alara's chest heaved, her palms stinging from the chain's rough bite, but the pain was a distant echo against the surge of something fiercer. Survival. Shared and electric, threading through the chill air like an unseen vein. She leaned against the stone wall, the locket at her throat pulsing with a warmth that seeped into her skin, as if the blood within it stirred to life amid the slaughter. Kyle stood before her, his broad back a barrier against the shadows, wiping the gore from his hands with the edge of his mantle. His breath came in measured gusts, fogging the torchlight, and when he turned, his storm-gray eyes met hers not with the cold calculation of a hunter, but with a flicker of recognition that made her heart stutter. "We can't stay here," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that cut through the wind's mournful howl outside. The castle stirred, a beast rousing from slumber, distant footsteps pattering like rain on ice, the hiss of awakening undead echoing from the depths. Draven's thralls were legion, drawn by the scent of spilled blood, and the vampire king himself lurked in the spires above, his ancient hunger a shadow over the frozen realm. Cale's guilt twisted sharper now, not just for the mate he had lost to these very fangs, but for this Omega he had unwittingly pulled into his vengeance. She was no pawn in his war, yet here she stood, fragile as a frost-laced rose, her defiance blooming in the ruin of her chains. Ilara nodded, the motion small but resolute, her bare feet numb against the frost-veined floor. Fear still coiled in her belly, a serpent whispering of betrayal's sting. The pack that had cast her out, the raiders who had dragged her here as chattel. But curiosity had hardened into something more, a tentative trust forged in the heat of their shared fight. His presence was a hearth in the endless cold, the Alpha's scent of pine and earth wrapping around her like a forgotten cloak, chasing the decay from her lungs. She followed as he led them deeper into the labyrinthine halls, away from the cell's gloom, his steps silent and predatory, guiding her through alcoves where torch flames guttered like dying stars. They slipped into a forgotten chamber, high in the castle's underbelly, a relic of some ancient siege, its walls scarred by claw marks and half-melted by long-extinguished fires. Snow sifted through a cracked arrow slit, carried on the wind's icy breath, piling in delicate drifts against the iron-bound door. Cale barred it with a rusted beam, the wood groaning under his strength, then turned to her, his expression etched with the melancholy of a king who bore too many ghosts. "This will hold for a time," he said, scanning the room's shadows. A crumbling hearth dominated one wall, its stones blackened by ashes long cold, and beside it lay remnants of forgotten warmth. Tattered furs, a splintered table, the faint outline of runes etched into the floor, lunar crescents faded to whispers. Ilara sank onto a fur, the coarse hide rough against her skin, drawing her knees to her chest as the adrenaline ebbed, leaving exhaustion in its wake. The locket rested heavy against her heart, its silver surface catching the pale moonlight that pierced the slit, illuminating the dried blood within like a crimson secret. She watched him prowl the chamber, his movements fluid yet burdened, the weight of his crown invisible but palpable. Who was this Alpha, breaking into the heart of undeath, not as a conqueror, but as a man haunted by what he could not save? Empathy stirred in her, soft as the snow's fall, thawing the walls she had built around her rejected soul. "You came for him," she said quietly, her voice weaving through the silence. "The vampire king. But you freed me first. Why?" Kyle paused, his hand lingering on the hearth's edge, fingers tracing the cold stone as if seeking embers that weren't there. The question pierced him, stirring the guilt that had festered since his queen's death. Her screams echoing in his dreams, the vampire's raid a failure of his vigilance. He had rationalized his path as duty, a king's ethical blade to sever the curse threatening his Silver Fang lands, but this Omega's gaze unraveled the lie. Her eyes, deep and unyielding, held no judgment, only the quiet pain of one who knew exile's bite. The bond tugged at him again, instinctive and resisted, a fated pull he dared not name amid the storm of his purpose. "Mercy isn't weakness," he replied at last, his tone gravel-rough with unspoken confession. "It's the choice that spares us from becoming the monsters we hunt." He knelt by the hearth, striking flint to steel, sparks flying like fleeting stars until a flame caught, hungry and orange against the gloom. The fire's warmth spread, tentative at first, then blooming to chase the chill from the air. Ilara edged closer, the heat kissing her chilled skin, awakening sensations she had numbed in the cell's depths, the crackle of flames mirroring the slow unfurling of her spirit. Outside, the wind wailed, carrying uives from the border wolves, distant kin to the wild she had lost, while the moon hung low, its silver light spilling over the snow like spilled blood under its gaze. Kale fed the fire with splintered wood from the table, his scars catching the glow, marks of wars where compassion had cost him dearly. Empathy deepened between them, a bridge over the chasm of their wounds. She saw the king beneath the hunter, ethical and melancholic, his duty a chain heavier than any iron. As the flame steadied, casting dancing shadows that played across his face, Ilara reached out, her fingers brushing his arm in a gesture born of the refugee's fragile peace. The contact sparked, warm and visceral, the locket flaring with sudden heat against her chest. He didn't pull away, his gray eyes locking onto hers, the denial fracturing like ice under spring's thaw. In that moment, amid the fire's roar and the wind's lament, the bond shifted, empathy weaving into something profound, a vow unspoken against the common foe clawing at the door. But doubt lingered, a spiritual dilemma. Could redemption bloom in this den of blood and frost? Or would their connection demand a sacrifice neither was ready to name? The moon watched, impartial, as the fire crackled on, illuminating the path where protection became destiny's first fragile thread. The fire's glow painted the chamber in hues of amber and shadow, a fragile sanctuary amid the castle's encroaching night. Ilara sat cross-legged on the furs, the warmth seeping into her bones like a long-forgotten promise, yet it could not thaw the knot of uncertainty twisting in her chest. The locket lay open in her palm now, its silver crescent catching the flame's dance, the dried blood within a dark pearl that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. She traced its edge with a fingertip, the metal humming faintly against her skin, as if awakening to the rhythm of her pulse. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, whipping snow against the arrow slit in furious gusts, while distant wives pierced the veil. Wolves on the prowl, their cries a lament for the wild heart she had once called home. Kyle crouched by the hearth, his broad frame silhouetted against the blaze, feeding its splintered remnants with deliberate care. His storm-gray eyes, shadowed by the weight of unspoken kingship, flicked to her now and then, tracing the lines of her face with the intensity that bordered on reverence. The bond between them had deepened in this refuge, empathy forging links stronger than any chain. Yet he held himself apart, his melancholy a barrier as unyielding as the castle's ice-clad walls. Guilt clung to him like frost on fur, the memory of his queen's blood staining the snow, her final breath a curse on his vigilance. He had come to end Draven, to sever the vampire's curse that bled his Silverfang lands dry. But this Omega, with her quiet fire and rejected grace, unraveled his resolve thread by thread. Ilara closed her fingers around the locket, the warmth intensifying, spreading up her arm like liquid moonlight. She had always felt it, this hidden pulse within her, a gift from the goddess, whispered in the old tales of Omegas who walked paths unseen. Her pack had dismissed it as weakness, branding her blood too dilute for the Alpha's hunt, casting her into exile where the blizzards nearly claimed her soul. But here, in the heart of undeath, with this broken king at her side, the gift stirred, insistent as the moon's pull on the tides. "It was my mother's," she said softly, her voice weaving through the crackle of flames. "A rite unfinished, Blood of the Pathfinder, they called it, meant to guide the lost through shadow. But I am no guide. I am the lost. Kyle turned fully toward her, his movements slow, as if the air itself resisted the shift. The firelight carved hollows in his cheeks, illuminating the ancient scar along his jaw, a mark from the raid that stole his mate, a reminder of the ethical blade he wielded as king. He had denied the fated pull since the moment their eyes met in her cell, rationalizing it as the haze of battle, the instinct of an alpha shielding the vulnerable. Yet now, as he watched her cradle the locket, a deeper truth clawed at him. His pack's seers had spoken of a key to the curse, a lunar blood that could unbind Draven's ancient pact with the shadows, forged under a blood moon centuries past. Not a weapon of silver or fang, but a revelation of mercy, a Pathfinder's light to expose the vampire's hidden heart. Could it be her? The thought ignited a storm in his chest, guilt mingling with dawning awe. The chamber trembled then, a low rumble vibrating through the stones, as if the castle itself sensed the awakening. Snow swirled through the arrow slit in a sudden gale, dusting the firs with crystalline flecks that melted in the fire's heat. Ilara gasped, her vision blurring at the edges, the locket flaring hot enough to burn. Images flooded her mind unbidden, flashes of silver fangs tearing through fur-clad warriors, a throne room awash in crimson under a bloated moon, Draven's pale form laughing as shadows coiled like living smoke. But beneath the horror, a thread of light, a hidden chamber deep in the spires, where the vampire king's phylactery pulsed, bound by blood not his own, her blood. The Pathfinder's gift manifested, raw and visceral, pulling secrets from the ether like veins from the earth. She cried out, doubling over, the locket's chain slipping from her grasp to clatter against the stone. Pain lanced through her, sharp as shattered ice, but it was the clarity that terrified, the weight of destinies entwining like roots in frozen soil. Cale was at her side in an instant, his strong hands steadying her shoulders, his touch a anchor amid the torrent. "Ilara," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips, the first time he had spoken it aloud. His gray eyes widened as the visions echoed in his own mind, faint but undeniable, a shared glimpse through the bond, the fated link he could no longer deny. The guilt that had armored him cracked, revealing the king beneath, ethical, yearning, marked by loss, yet reaching for redemption. "You see it," she whispered, tears freezing on her lashes as the vision faded, leaving her breathless. The fire roared higher, fed by an unseen draft, casting their shadows long and intertwined across the walls. Outside, the Uives grew frantic, a pack sensing the shift in the night's weave. The locket lay between them, its blood drop gleaming like a fresh wound, the symbol of her hidden power, now laid bare. Kyle lifted it gently, his scarred fingers reverent, placing it back around her neck. The contact sent a shiver through them both, the air thick with the scent of pine, smoke, and the metallic tang of awakening blood. "You're the key," he said, his voice rough with revelation, the words carrying the gravity of a crown reclaimed. "The Pathfinder. Draven's curse binds him to the shadows, but your blood, lunar and pure, can reveal the phylactery, unmake what he wrought." He pulled back slightly, conflict etching his features, the melancholy deepening. Duty warred with the bond. To use her gift meant thrusting her into the vampire's lair, risking the fragile light he had just begun to cherish. What was strength, if not choosing to wield mercy as a blade against one's own darkness? The wind battered the walls, snow hissing like serpents, while the moon's pale gaze filtered through, illuminating the dilemma. She was no longer just a refuge, but the destiny that could redeem or destroy him. Ilara met his eyes, the gift's echo still humming in her veins, a spiritual fire that chased the chill of rejection from her soul. The connection was no longer resisted, but embraced in quiet acceptance. Yet the cost loomed. her freedom, his guilt, the blood that must flow for the curse to break. The chamber felt smaller now, the fire's warmth a deceptive veil over the storm brewing beyond. In that suspended breath, amid the crackle of flames and the whisper of snow, the revelation bound them tighter, a thread of fate woven from pain and possibility, where the rejected Omega became the Queen of Shadows undone. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The chamber's fragile peace shattered like frost under a boot, the rumble from the stones swelling into a thunderous roar that shook dust from the rafters. Ilara's vision cleared, but the locket's heat lingered in her veins, a burning thread pulling her toward the unknown depths of the castle. She rose unsteadily, her hand finding Cale's arm for support, the contact grounding her amid the tremor. His touch was steady, calloused fingers wrapping around hers with a king's quiet resolve, yet his gray eyes darkened with the storm of what her gift had unveiled. The phylactery, Draven's shadowed heart, hidden in the spires, bound by blood that mirrored her own lunar essence. To reveal it meant confronting not just the vampire, but the ghosts of their pasts, her pack's betrayal, his fractured realm, the traitors who had opened the borders to undeath. "We go now," Cale said, his voice a low growl edged with urgency, releasing her hand only to draw his silver dagger, its blade catching the fire's dying embers like a sliver of moonlight. The wind outside howled fiercer, battering the arrow slit with fists of snow, while the distant wives sharpened into a frenzy, wolves sensing the unraveling of fates. Ilara nodded, the Pathfinder's gift humming in her blood, illuminating an inner map, twisting corridors leading upward, past chambers of frozen screams, to the throne room where Draven held court. Fear clawed at her, not for the fangs awaiting, but for the choice it forced, love's fragile bloom against the war she might ignite, freedom's whisper drowned in blood. They slipped from the refuge, Kyle leading with predatory grace, his mantle whispering against the stone as they ascended spiral stairs slick with ice. Torchlight flickered erratically, casting their shadows as elongated specters that merged and parted like reluctant lovers. The air grew thicker, laced with the copper tang of fresh blood and the rot of eternal night, the castle awakening to their intrusion. Ilara's bare feet padded silently, the cold biting into her soles, but the locket warmed her chest, its blood drop pulsing in rhythm with her heart, a beacon guiding them through the labyrinth. Whispers echoed from the walls, spectral voices of the damned, murmuring of betrayals long past, her alpha's scorn, weak blood for a weak pack, and Cale's queen, her final cry lost to vampire hunger. The stairs opened into a grand hall, its vaulted ceiling lost in gloom, pillars carved with snarling wolves now defiled by claw marks and crimson runes. Snow drifted through breached walls, piling in wind-sculpted dunes that muffled their steps. But the illusion of emptiness shattered. A figure emerged from the shadows, not thrall or vampire, but flesh and fur. Thorn, Cale's former beta, eyes gleaming with treacherous light. He was broader than memory, his once loyal frame twisted by ambition, a rival alpha who had sold secrets to Draven for a taste of power. Behind him loomed a cadre of silver-fang wolves, their coats matted with frost and blood, hackles raised in conflicted snarls. The pack, Cale's pack, had followed the intruder's trail, drawn by loyalty or the promise of reclaiming their king's vengeance. "Cale," Thorn rumbled, his voice thick with mock sorrow, stepping forward with a swagger that belied the guilt flickering in his gaze. "You've come crawling back from exile in your own mind, dragging this remnant?" His eyes raked over Ilara, dismissing her as the rejected Omega, but the locket caught his stare, its glow stirring unease. The wind whipped through the hall, carrying weaves from the borders, wolves torn between old oaths and new hungers. Cale halted, his body tensing like a bowstring, dagger raised but not striking, the ethical weight of his crown holding him in check. This was the confrontation with the past, the traitor who had lured the vampires across the mountains, the pack that had fractured under his grief-stricken rule, demanding war over the mercy he now glimpsed in Alara's eyes. Alara's breath caught, the hall's chill seeping deeper as memories flooded her, the pack's circle under the moon, her banishment a ritual of shame, freedom stolen in the name of strength. Thorn's betrayal mirrored it, power over compassion, hierarchy over heart. She stepped beside Kale, her hand brushing his, the bond a silent anchor amid the rising tension. "He's using you," she whispered, her voice carrying the Pathfinder's clarity, visions flickering at the edges. Thorn's pact sealed in blood, Draven's whispers promising a throne built on Silverfang bones. The wolves growled low, circling, their eyes reflecting the moon's pale judgment through the breached walls, snow swirling like veils between them. Kyle's jaw clenched, guilt surging like a blizzard in his chest. The Queen's death, his failure, the pack's division, his burden. Thorn had been brother once, the beta who urged caution while he raged, but ambition had festered into treason. "You opened the gates," Kale accused, his tone steady yet laced with melancholy, the dagger gleaming in the torchlight. "For what? A crown of ice and lies?" The rival Alpha laughed, bitter and hollow, gesturing to the wolves. "You led us to ruin, mourning a ghost while vampires feast. Join us, end Draven. Claim your pack, or die with your pity." The choice loomed, moral and visceral. Forgiveness for the traitor, weaving the pack back with threads of mercy, or war's bloody forge, freedom from guilt through vengeance. Ilara felt it in her bones, the locket burning hot, its blood drop a crimson warning. Love or liberty, Kale's heart tethered to her, or severed in the fray. She squeezed his hand, empathy flooding her, the rejected Omega seeing the king's fracture. Duty demanding retribution, yet the bond whispering of redemption's cost. Outside, the moon crested, bathing the hall in silver, illuminating the wolves' conflicted stares, fire from a dying brazier spitting embers like accusations. Thorn lunged, claws extended, the pack surging in a wave of fur and fangs, the confrontation erupting in a whirlwind of snow and blood. Kyle met him blade to claw, their bodies crashing against a pillar with a crack that echoed like thunder, while Ilara dodged a snapping maw, her gift flaring to reveal weak points. Thorn's scarred flank, the hesitation in a young wolf's eyes. Blood sprayed, warm and metallic against the cold, staining the snow red under the moon's gaze. Kale fought not with rage, but precision born of sorrow, parrying blows that once were brothers' spars. A slash opened Thorn's shoulder, but he spared the killing stroke, gray eyes locking with his rivals. "Mercy," Kale growled through gritted teeth, "is the war we win against ourselves." Ilara cried out as a wolf pinned her, jaws inches from her throat, but the locket's light burst forth, blinding the beast with visions of its own lost kin, enough to make it recoil, whining in confusion. The pack faltered, the air thick with the scent of pine, blood, and thawing frost, the wind's howl a dirge for choices unmade. Thorn staggered back, clutching his wound, eyes widening at the Omega's glow, the Pathfinder unveiled, her presence a spiritual blade cutting through betrayal's veil. "What sorcery is this?" he spat, but doubt cracked his voice, the wolves milling uncertainly. Kale lowered his dagger, chest heaving, the ethical dilemma etching deeper lines on his face. Forgive the traitor. Bind the pack with compassion's fragile chain, risking Draven's shadow to consume them all? Or unleash war, claiming freedom in blood, but losing the redemption Ilara offered? She rose, bloodied but unbroken, meeting his gaze across the fray, the love they had resisted now a crossroads, freedom's illusion against the heart's true liberty. The moon watched, impartial, as snow fell like tears, the fire's embers dying to whispers, leaving only the dilemma. In this hall of ghosts, could mercy crown the fallen, or would war's roar drown the soul's quiet plea? The locket pulsed, a heartbeat in the silence, fate's judgment hanging on the edge of a blade withheld. The hall's chaos ebbed like a receding tide, leaving behind the metallic reek of blood and the ragged symphony of heaving breaths. Snow continued to sift through the breached walls, blanketing the stone in a hush that amplified every drip from wounded flanks, every whimper from the circling wolves. Alara stood amid the fray's remnants, her shift torn and blood-flecked, the locket at her throat a searing talisman against the chill that clawed deeper than the wind's fury. Her gift thrummed in her veins, a lunar current illuminating the fractures in the pack's snarls, loyalty warring with doubt, the scent of pine and earth mingling with the sour tang of betrayal. Thorn knelt now, one hand clamped over the gash Cale had spared, his eyes wild with the shock of mercy's edge, the rival alpha reduced to a shadow of his ambition. Cale lowered his dagger fully, the silver blade dripping crimson onto the snow-dusted floor, where it melted into dark rivulets like veins of thawed ice. His chest rose and fell with the weight of the choice, guilt's ancient scar twisting anew, not for the queen lost to these very halls, but for the kingdom he might yet salvage through compassion's fragile forge. The pack milled uneasily, their golden eyes reflecting the moon's unyielding silver through the storm-lashed openings, uves fading to uncertain whines as the Pathfinder's light lingered in their minds, visions of kin and redemption piercing their feral haze. Ilara felt it all, her heart a drum echoing the wind's lament, the rejected Omega who had wandered blizzards now standing as the axis of fates entwined. Love had bloomed resisted, rationalized in stolen glances and shared silences, but acceptance flooded her now, warm as hearthfire against the eternal frost. "You'd spare me?" Thorn rasped, his voice cracking like splintered bone, blood seeping between his fingers to stain the white drifts red. He glanced at Alara, the locket's glow casting prismatic shadows across his scarred face, stirring the unease of one who had bartered souls for power. The wolves shifted, a low growl rippling through them, but none lunged. Her gift had woven doubt into their blood, revealing the traitor's pact as a chain binding them all to Draven's shadow. Cale stepped forward, his mantle ragged and bloodied, the king's melancholy etching deeper lines into his brow. "Mercy isn't surrender," he said, his tone gravel rough, yet laced with the ethical steel that had defined his rule. "It's the rebirth we choose over the grave. Join us, Thorn. End this not with more blood, but with the light that unmakes the dark." Alara's breath caught, the air thick with the scents of frost-kissed fur, smoldering embers from the brazier, and the underlying rot of the castle's undeath stirring awake. The choice hung palpably, a moral precipice: sacrifice the past's wounds to the pyre of war, or cure them through union's quiet strength. Her pack's rejection echoed in her bones, the alpha's snarl, unfit for the wild, banishing her to the fringes where vampires had claimed her as chattel. Yet here, in this hall of ghosts, she glimpsed rebirth, not as the weak blood they deemed, but as the Pathfinder whose lunar essence could heal the fractures of kings and kin alike. She reached for Cale's hand, her fingers intertwining with his scarred ones, the contact a spark that chased the chill from her soul. The bond, once denied in the cell's gloom and the refuge's firelit whispers, now pulsed undeniable, a fated union born of shared exile, guilt's redemption in her touch. Thorn's shoulders slumped, the rival's fire dimming to embers of regret. His nod, a silent yielding as the pack closed ranks not in attack, but alliance. Whispers rippled through them, youths softening to a harmonious call under the moon's watchful gaze, the wind easing as if the goddess herself exhaled approval. But the castle trembled anew, deeper vibrations rumbling from the spires above, Draven awakening, his ancient curse coiling like smoke through the stones, drawn by the blood spilled and the light unveiled. Ilara's vision flared once more, the locket burning hot, guiding them upward. The throne room, where the vampire king's phylactery throbbed in shadowed alcoves, bound by blood not his own, but echoing hers, a crimson thread woven centuries past under a blood moon. They moved as one now, Kale at her side, the pack fanning out like shadows reborn, Thorn limping but resolute in their wake. The stairs spiraled into the heart of the fortress, torch flames guttering in drafts that carried the hiss of awakening thralls, snow swirling in eddies that clung to their fur like fleeting doubts. Ilara's bare feet left faint prints in the frost. Each step a renunciation of chains, physical and spiritual, the Omega's quiet power blooming amid the Alpha's ethical fire. Love was no reward, but proof, her presence the mercy that crowned his fall, his protection, the destiny that mended her rejection. The throne room loomed at last, a cavernous maw of ice-veined marble and obsidian pillars, the air heavy with the stench of eternal feast, blood congealed in goblets, shadows writhing like living veins. Draven rose from his throne of frozen bones, his pale form elegant and decayed, eyes glowing with ruby hunger as the moon's light pierced the vaulted dome, bathing the chamber in silver judgment. The hunter and his stray, he sneered, voice a silken rasp echoing off the walls, fangs glinting like shattered stars. Thralls shambled from the gloom, a tide of undeath, but the pack met them with snarls and claws, furred bodies a whirlwind of retribution tempered by purpose. Kyle charged, dagger flashing, but Ilara held back, the locket's pulse guiding her to the alcove's heart, a pedestal veiled in frost where the phylactery pulsed, a crystal vial of ancient blood, dark and viscous, binding Draven's immortality. Her hand trembled as she approached, the vampire's gaze locking onto her, recognition dawning in his snarl. "The Pathfinder's blood," he hissed, lunging past Kale's guard, claws extended. Pain exploded in her side as they raked her flesh, hot blood spilling to mingle with the snow on the floor. But she pressed on, fingers shattering the ice to grasp the vial. The contact ignited, a surge of lunar fire through her veins, her own blood from the locket mingling in a ritual of sacrifice and cure. Visions cascaded, Dravens packed with shadows, forged in betrayal, now unraveled by her essence, the pure Omega blood dissolving the curse like dawn on frost. He howled, body convulsing as undeath fled, his form crumbling to ash under the moon's gaze, the thralls collapsing in heaps of desiccated bone. Kyle caught her as she fell, his arms a cradle of union, their bond sealing the rebirth, guilt's chains broken, rejection's wounds healed in the quiet acceptance of fates intertwined. The pack gathered, eaves rising in triumph as the wind stilled, snow falling gentle now, like blessings from the goddess. Ilara leaned into Kale's warmth, the locket cooling against her healed skin, its blood drop a symbol transformed, from exile's mark to redemption's seal. In the throne room's hush, amid the embers of fallen fire and the moon's soft benediction, they rose together. King and queen, Alpha and Omega, the fallen crowned in mercy's light. Strength was choosing love over liberty, compassion over power, the heart's quiet flame enduring where war's roar had faded. The castle groaned one final time, ice cracking under spring's unseen thaw, as rebirth claimed the night. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.